Good morning. I want to welcome all of you to the Foreign Policy Research Institute's panel discussion on U.S.-Spanish relationships, the North Africa dimension. Before we get into our program, I would like to point out to our audience, one, that this is a free event for you, but it's not free for us, so we appreciate any support that you can give to FPRI and to the Africa program. I would also like to remind you that if you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the question and answers section and not in the chat box so that we don't miss them. At about the halfway mark of the panel discussion today, I will be taking the questions from the audience for our panelists. Now I'll introduce the program. Since 9/11 attacks, the strategic partnership between Spain and the United States has mainly been driven by shared national security interest in the counter-terrorism area, and this has led to a significant amount of intelligence sharing and defense security cooperation, particularly on the African continent, and especially in East Africa and the Sahel. But it's also reinforced the importance of the U.S. overseas military footprint, especially in Spain. But these have been tense relations over the last few years, due primarily to domestic political factors, but also some foreign policy issues. Our panel, which includes some foremost scholars and experts on Spain and Spanish-U.S. relations, you can read their bios if you read the announcement of this event. Our moderator will be Mr. Barney Jobson, who is a correspondent with the Financial Times. He has 20 years of experience with Financial Times, currently reporting on Spain and Madrid from his base. Spain and Portugal, from his base in Madrid. Can
everyone hear me now?
Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Jobson, who will introduce the panelists. Each panelist will make a few introductory remarks, and we'll have a brief moderated discussion. And after that, we will take the questions from the audience. Turn it over to you, Mr. Jobson.
Many thanks, Ambassador Ray. It's great to be here. We've got a lot to discuss today. As you say, we're talking about US-Spain relations, which to me are fascinating because they're complicated, they're tense right now, and they really matter because they're not just about bilateral issues between the US and Spain. They really touch on a series of global issues: defense spending, immigration, China, Gaza, and North Africa, which is what our focus is today. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves to you very briefly before we get into my questions and the audience's questions. And I'll start with Michael. Michael Walsh, can you tell us who you are and give us a quick summary of your research interests? And if Michael can't, let's move on to Edward. We'll come back to Michael. Edward, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those of us who are on the other side of the Atlantic. I'm Eduard Soler. I'm an associate professor on international relations at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. I have previously worked also for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Madrid, and I'm mainly working on foreign policy analysis, Spanish foreign policy in that respect, but also my area of expertise is the Middle East and North Africa.
Great, thank you, Eduard. Alberto, can I turn to you?
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. So I'm Alberto Bueno, an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of Granada, as well as I'm a young professor at the University of Leipzig in Germany. So mainly my research focuses on defense policy, military policy, national security, and civil military relations in Europe, but especially in about and on Spain. Glad to be here.
Great, thank you. And Juan Luis.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join this panel and to have this nice conversation. My name is Juan Luis Manfredi. I am full professor at the University of Castilla-La Mancha, where I teach international studies and journalism, mostly public diplomacy, political leadership, propaganda, things like that. My expertise with the US is based on my own experience as far as I was a Prince of Asturias professor in Georgetown for the last 3 years. And it's amazing how fast American foreign policy is changing. Let's see if it is a trend, or it's new, or what is old, or what is new. Let's see. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And finally, we will hopefully soon be joined by Michael Walsh, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He's having some connection trouble, but we hope he will arrive soon. So, Alberto, I'm going to start with you with the questions. Spain often talks about the importance of the southern flank in security. What the southern flank means is North Africa. Even in the context of the war in Ukraine, Spain is constantly reminding us that, we mustn't forget security in the southern flank. And there's a vacuum there to some extent, Alberto, I think, in the Sahel, which is often talked about as a breeding ground for terrorism. We know it's a source of violent Islamist movements. Is Spain in a position to fill that vacuum, Alberto? Should it be doing more to secure the Sahel?
So thank you. That's a dead question, I would say. So Spain has consistently identified the southern flank Sahel as a key priority in its national security strategy. So this emphasis is evident in official documents and speeches where the region is portrayed as a source of critical challenges. So as you have mentioned, migration, tourism, state fragility, hybrid threats, and so on. The focus is reinforced by growing concerns over regional dynamics, especially the rivalry between Morocco and Algeria, the arms race that both countries are pursuing, and especially also Morocco's increasingly assertive posture, looking for a regional hegemony in the region. And Spain views these developments not only as destabilizing, but also as directly affecting its strategic interests, particularly in the Canary Island, Ceuta and Melilla, those small cities in the northern coast of Africa. So also Spain has increasingly emphasized its unique position to articulate European security interests in the south. And this includes highlighting, the need for a more balanced NATO approach that goes beyond the eastern flank and takes into account the multi-dimensional risk emerging from that region. But while this strategic discourse points southward, that's true, okay, the practical position remains limited. Its military presence in the Sahel and North Africa is modest at this time, and even decreased once, for example, France left the country. The European Union training mission taking place in the Northern Africa finished. So this is really a problem for Spain. And we have to add to this question, for example, budgetary constraints, the political fragmentation at home, the reliance on multilateral formats, as for example, NATO, who is, at the moment, the focus is not on the Sahel, North Africa, or the EU, as I have mentioned. We had some troubles getting in. So in that sense, Spain had a paradox position. On the one hand, this is crystal clear a key strategic area for the country. Every document, declaration, our policy looks south. But on the other hand, we have some really problems in order to engage, to commit ourselves in the region because of the different alliances, the posture, or the difficult in order to find a branch in order to land in the region. So we have to yes, please.
In some ways, Spain talking the talk but not walking the walk, if I can put it that way. You mentioned,
it's a good definition. It's a good
you mentioned defense spending. The Spanish foreign minister was in Washington yesterday. Marco Rubio reminded him that the US position is we want NATO members to spend 5% of their GDP on defense. Spain is just crawling towards 2%. So to bring the US into this, is security in the Sahel an area, Alberto, where you think the US is unhappy with Spain precisely because it's not spending enough, it's not doing enough?
I'd like to look at this as a trade-off. In that sense, maybe U.S. I don't see Spain as or has seen Spain as a key ally there, or at least the key partner there. For example, I would say that France has played a more important role in that sense, and as well as other countries. But it's true that if for Spain that region is critical, it could be interesting to find this kind of compromise, this balance between, okay, I'm spending more as is your goal, and on the contrary, I try to gain your support for my objectives and goals in the Northern Africa, Maghreb, Sahel, I would say.
Okay, great, thank you, Alberto. Michael Walsh, are you with us now? If not, we'll move on to Edouard. Edouard, I wanted to ask you about Morocco, which is obviously part of that broader regional picture. In 2022, Spain shifted its policy on Morocco. It had been on the Western Sahara, I should say. It had been neutral for a long time. It shifted its position to what was seen as a more pro-Moroccan position. And that's a decision that came after the first Trump administration actually persuaded Morocco to recognize Israel and strengthened its own ties with Morocco. So, Edouard, I want to ask you, what do you think this second Trump administration means for US-Morocco relations, and where does Spain fit into that picture?
Well, perhaps the first thing could be to say, particularly for our American listeners, how important North Africa is for Spain. And there's no point of comparison about the importance that North Africa may have for the United States of America. It's a matter of proximity. From where I'm speaking, from Barcelona, we are at 500 kilometers from Algiers. 500 kilometers. There is only 14 kilometers in the Strait of Gibraltar between the Andalusian coast and North Africa. Therefore, I was tempted to look at comparisons. Is it comparable to Latin America with the United States? Not even. It's more. Therefore, this is a very important thing. Spanish officials are thinking about North Africa daily, hourly. And interestingly, though, even if this is not a big issue for the United States of America and its leadership, whatever the US does has consequences for North Africa and has consequences for Spain. And as you rightly pointed out, Trump's tweet diplomacy, it was still Twitter at that time, with the announcement of the dual recognition of the sovereignty over the Western Sahara and then welcoming the normalization agreement of Israel, have had huge impact for Spain's interests. You may remember that with the excuse of Spain hosting the leader of the Polisario Front, who was hospitalized because he was sick of COVID, there was a huge migration crisis in one of those cities that Alberto was referring before, Ceuta. And then afterwards, after a few months of negotiation, there was this U-turn in the foreign policy. Well, it was the capacity of Morocco to push so much on Spain that has to be partially understood by the backing that Trump had provided well before, even if Trump was not in power in 2021. So it means that we are very closely scrutinizing what the US thinks and does or does not on Morocco, on North Africa at large. So here you could expect that any additional support for Morocco or for Moroccan positions on this issue may be met with additional pressures for Spain to do more. So here one aspect that we are we are looking closely is whether what will happen with the possibility of the opening of the consulate in the territories administered or occupied according to the Sahrawis in the Western Sahara. What does it mean for the competition between Morocco and Algeria, the arms race Is the US escalating or de-escalating this competition? This is huge. I mean, these are our two southern neighbors. If they fight, we suffer the consequences. And what does it also mean in terms of the policies and decisions and narratives of the US for the international order? They also impact North Africa and our relations with our North African countries. Let me finish with an example. When there are messages from the US, from the Oval Office, that borders may be redrawn, that Greenland may be incorporated into the United States of America, it makes more sense. Well, others in the South could think that it makes more sense that Ceuta and Melilla or the Canary Islands are not part of Spain. So if borders can be redrawn, why not those where there are most obvious territorial disputes with our southern neighbors? So indeed, it matters a lot, and there hasn't been so far huge steps to worry Spain, but this is something that Spanish officials, and I would say even the Spanish society, is very closely looking at.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning Ceuta and Melilla. These are the two small Spanish enclaves on the African continent, and I think it's safe to say, Eduard, that any questioning of their status would be absolutely explosive in Spain.
Yeah, particularly because it would ignite the political debate. This is not even a matter of sovereignty. It would be a huge political issue because then the government would be pushed by the right-wing parties to defend the Spanishness of the two cities. The same happens with migration. The North Africa, in that respect, Morocco, and these two cities is not a foreign policy issue. It's an issue which is heavily politically loaded domestically.
Yeah. Thank you, Eduard. Juan Luis, let me turn to you, and I'd like to just step back a little bit to talk about Spanish policy more generally. The Spanish government is led by Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, a member of the left-wing Socialist Party, and there are several areas where his positions are different from the Trump administration, to say the least. Spain is fostering reasonably warm relations with China. The Trump administration is not. Spain is very critical of the Israeli military operation in Gaza. The Trump administration is not. Spain is not spending a whole lot on defense. The Trump administration wants to spend a lot more. So there's clear differences there. But Juan Luis, do you see North Africa as an area where Spain could find areas of common interest with the US, or is it an area where some of these tensions are likely to be exacerbated?
Thank you very much. I think we can find some areas in common if we pay attention to how the world is changing. I will define at least 4 areas where you can find, I will say, pragmatic approach to foreign policy. It's not based on values, it's not based on future activities, but we share 4 big problems and we have to think together. The first one is the issue of industrial policy and electric, automotive, and cars, and minerals, and so on. We have the opportunity to think together, I mean, Morocco, Spain, and the US, how to rebuild this industrial policy. To be honest, is an euphemism to avoid Southeast Asia and China, of course. This is connected, as Eduard said very well, with relocation. I mean, do you want to consider what is the impact of China in Northern Africa? Because China is investing a lot in ports, in infrastructures, in Tangiers, in Dhaka, in other places. Okay, can Spain and the US offer something different in this relocation process? Can we work together in a different supply chain? Because this is very relevant for China. I mean, to export to Africa, in particular to Egypt and to Tunisia and Morocco, China needs ports and China needs space and places and infrastructures. And those are in Morocco, not in Spain. So we have to consider that also if you want to add this layer of security and securitization of supply chains and so on. So, I mean, first of all, industrial policy. Second, relocation and supply chain. Third, gas. I will not say too much because Michael finally, it seems he's here and probably he can explain a bit more about gas and energy. But let me finish with the fourth point, which is migration. Okay, I agree with Eduard that we are in a different position. It's not comparable, but we have something in common. I mean, we have a huge frontier with the South, a huge, and that frontier is unpredictable. We don't know very well how to manage. It's not clear who is in charge of everything there. We have different countries with different interests and different tools to push the frontier in one way or another. So maybe we can work together in any type of policy. In the past, last year, even Spain and the US signed, let's say, a fifth country migration policy, something like that, which means, okay, we are going to accept Latin American people coming from Mexico to the US. Instead going to the US, they will come to Spain. Okay, can we do something new, something innovative in that way? Can we explore a pragmatic approach to migration? I'm not sure. Here I see a big divide. So the militarization of the frontier in North Mexico, south of the US, this is not the way Spain is going to manage the immigration policy. But, you know, I think four big elements, industrial policy, supply chains, energy, migration. Yes, we have a lot of in common, but we need to leverage our defense spending. That's very clear. For me, there's no way to say, hey, we have to pay attention to the southern flank, like Alberto said very well, but we don't have the money. So this is not the new world. This is not going to work. We have to understand that if we want to have a ticket for this new world, we have to buy the ticket, and probably it means investing more than 2%, maybe 3.5. I don't know. It's too much for Spain, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Juan Luis. Michael Walsh, are you with us now?
I am. Sorry for the connectivity
Excellent.
issues.
Great. Well, I don't know how much of the discussion you've heard, Michael, but let me come back to the US side of things. What do you think Donald Trump thinks of Pedro Sanchez, to the extent that he thinks about Pedro Sanchez at all? And related to that, a few months ago, Trump in the Oval Office described Spain as a BRICS country, the BRICS group being Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now others. What did you make of that comment?
So there's a nexus between those two questions, which I'm sure you're aware of. It's a really good one. So the way that Spain's being framed in the U.S. under the second term of the Trump administration is not advantageous to Spain. The way that it's not advantageous to U.S.-Spain relations either. And so Spain is being framed as being too far on what Pete Hegseth has called the other side of the ledger, and leaning too far towards China, leaning too far towards accommodation, leaning too far to not assuming the burden that the Trump administration expects partners to assume and is demanding that partners assume. And, Pedro Sanchez himself has been a vocal critic of Trump at times, and has gone out there and for domestic political reasons, as well as just fundamental international relations viewpoints. He's made arguments that run counter to the Trump agenda. The reality is there's a lot of people doing that, though. So Pedro Sanchez is not the only one. And it's not a complete obstacle towards moving forward with the relationship. I mean, historically, I think it's part of the problem. Historically, Spain has gotten accustomed to the reality that you can have these overt partisan political disagreements, but behind closed doors, you can figure out solutions and continue to work forward. And that's worked relatively well for the last 20 years. Whenever there's been crises, things have been able to be resolved, behind closed doors. The problem with the Trump administration is it's kind of hard to know whether you can do that, and it kind of changes with the times. And so there's just much more instability, uncertainty, turbulence in the relationship, in the external environment and the internal environment, the environment between Sanchez and Trump, the environment between the U.S. military and European militaries, and that whole reality that we're now embedded within, this U.S.-Spain relationship's embedded in, Spain has to navigate. And that's going to be the big challenge for the Sanchez administration moving forward.
Thank you, Michael. Let me ask you a particular question about gas, which one of the other panelists raised. We know that the US is a big exporter of LNG to Europe. We know that the Trump administration is a champion of fossil fuels, unlike the Biden administration. There's a lot of gas in North Africa and Algeria in particular. What interest does the US have in the future of the North African gas industry?
So there's 2 points that I think that US-Spain relations is not hitting on that would be beneficial if the Sanchez administration prioritized. One is narco trafficking, and the other is energy and critical minerals access. And when you look at Algeria and you look at where Algeria is positioned, when you talk about the Trans-Saharan pipeline, you talk about any of these.
This is the pipeline that would go from Nigeria up through Niger into Algeria. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when you look at the top 5 proven reserves, the big countries in Africa, you have Algeria, you have Nigeria, you have Angola, you have South Sudan. So these are countries that really matter for energy security in the future. And so I think that when you look at what's happening with that relationship, the big question is what happens next? And, how do you leverage that to the advantage of, of Spain in US-Spain bilateral relations? And the way that you do that is I think you try to find a nexus point between Algeria relations and US-Algeria relations and Spain-Algeria relations, because Algeria is going to be a big player in oil and gas for the next couple of decades. And when you look at Congress, you look at specifically what the new subcommittee chair, Ted Cruz, on the Senate side for Africa, has said that one of his priorities is energy and critical minerals access. And I know that's sub-Saharan Africa, and for those who don't follow US domestic politics, it's sort of confusing because we segment off North Africa from the rest of Africa. But what it means is you have a senator from Texas who cares about energy and cares about critical minerals. And I think this is the big opportunity for Spain. If Spain can find a way to leverage the Nigeria-Algeria nexus, because you look at the other countries, Libya. I mean, Libya has incredible instability. It's going to be very hard to realize major energy investments with any certainty. I mean, there's a lot of risk there. South Sudan's a mess. I mean, we're looking at South Sudan today, right? And Angola is really a Biden play. And we know that the Trump administration is not very keen on giving wins to its predecessor. So the other 2 countries there are Nigeria and Algeria. So if you're Spain, you'd be trying to maximize that, and then that plays into the whole concerns about Morocco, Spain, US, that triumvirate. And if I was Morocco, I'd be doing the opposite. I'd be trying to drive a wedge between it. And so I think this is the reality. I mean, Spain has to take agency and has to try to find a way to leverage its relations with Algeria and its geopolitical position and its pipeline infrastructure access and all of this stuff. And right now, when we talk about Spain, we're talking about the Morocco option, not the Trans-Saharan pipeline option. And so that puts it back in the Morocco bucket. So, you hear all of these concerns about Morocco all the time from Spain, but the reality is that the way to fix that would be to have more of a forward presence, have more leverage, and be able to deliver for the members of Congress who want energy and critical mineral security in partnership with the US.
Thank you, Michael. Let me just encourage the audience to keep your questions coming in. The ambassador will tell me when we're going to move over to the questions. I've got a couple more that I'd like to put to our panel. Edouard, I'd like to come back to you. Michael mentioned Libya there. It's a very unstable place, as Michael said. It's also been in the news this week because there have been reports that the Trump administration is exploring a plan to relocate 1 million Palestinians from Gaza to Libya. The Spanish government is very strongly opposed to relocating Palestinians anywhere. So, Edouard, do you see this as a realistic plan? And if it is, where's Spain going to come down on it?
Well, probably it's not a realistic plan, but we should call the things as they are. This is not relocation. This is ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing is a war crime and a crime against humanity. Therefore, you could not expect, and probably you would not expect the US also to support it either, as you will not, and you cannot expect Spain to support it. So certainly, if this is an area where someone thinks that some cooperation could be built between the United States of America and the North African countries, or between the US and the other members of the Transatlantic Alliance, which in principle it's also an alliance among equals, it's not going, it's going nowhere. I mean, the more these issues are being put into the front, the more irritations we will have. Not only between Spain, US relations, but between also Arab, US, and transatlantic relations. What I would like to think is that this is a tactic move, an attempt to, to say something that looks impossible, so that perhaps we can explore something else. That's what I would like to think. But also, I mean, as I said, this is something that would only probably ignite the region more. And as I was saying before, perhaps seen from the other side of the Atlantic, you can live with an ignited North Africa. We cannot. So in that sense, this is probably the number one priority for Spain, wherever we refer to, and the consequences it has for North Africa. If it brings more stability, if it brings more prosperity, if it brings hopes for a shared future, we are for it. If it does not, we are obviously alarmed.
Yeah, thank you, Eduard. Alberto, let me ask you a question about Spanish domestic politics. Pedro Sanchez is not going to be the Prime Minister forever. There has to be an election in 2027. The government might fall for a variety of reasons before then. And at the moment, the polls show, Alberto, that the winner of the next election would probably be the Popular Party, which is a centre-right or conservative movement. If Spain ends up with a more conservative, a more right-of-centre government, Alberto, will that change foreign policy? Will that change the relationship with the US?
That's a question is the future for sure, but we have to understand firstly, for our American audience at least, that in Spain we have to, in order to understand politics, we have to think in two cleavages. The first for sure is right, left cleavage, and the second one is center periphery, which is important in order to understand coalitions, support, and so on, which sometimes makes sense in order to understand, like, for example, right parties voting in favor of left parties, depending on, again, this center periphery question. So that is the first thing. And according to that, yeah, we can expect a future victory of the People's Party according to the polls or some of them, or the trends at least. But the second question, if it's the People's Party could gain and retain the necessary number of votes at the parliament in order to, to become the prime minister, which is another question. And then the main ally is Vox, which is a far right party. Well, actually, with the current Trump administration, Vox has shown great support and completely aligned towards Trump's policy in many different areas, migration, trade, and so on. So in that sense, we can expect maybe a more, if this is the scenario that happened, a more pro-Trump's administration government for sure. That another view, and this is the last point I'd like to underline, is that the Spanish foreign policy beyond the party in chairing the government has shown a strong path dependence way. So this kind of constraints, international factors, national debt, for instance, multilateral agreements, NATO and EU are really important. And in the last 20, 30 years, all these external and domestic constraints had completely shaped the foreign policy, maintaining at a certain point a real continuity. So maybe we can expect even or it doesn't matter the color of the government, a continuity of politics in those terms.
Okay, thank you, Alberto. Juan Luis, let me actually move back a little bit and ask a slightly different question. As I say, Pedro Sanchez's government is fragile for various reasons. It's struggling to pass any legislation. It's struggling to pass a budget, and it's probably not going to pass a budget this year. Can you see a scenario, Juan Luis, in which it's actually a foreign policy question, a question related to the US, that finally brings down the government or forces an election? Could it be a disagreement with the Trump administration over North Africa or defense or China that finally brings this government to an end?
I will say two comments about that. The first one is that Spain is moving the flag a lot about anti-American issues. It's not clear why, but it's very clear that Spain is moving in one direction, according to many European, like many others European countries, in terms of Palestinian, China, and human rights, and so on. The problem or the question for Spain is that it is not clear that we have the capacity to let's say to be the one oppositing Donald Trump. So I expect in the near future specific actions from the Donald Trump administration against Spain. This is my intuition in the coming weeks.
Can you elaborate? What kind of actions might we see?
I mean, Trump administrations is very, let's say, very anti-European one, and Trump needs one country to be sanctioned, to be signaled, to be framed as the enemy, and maybe Spain is a good candidate for that. It will not be France, it will not be Germany, not Italy. So you need Spain. Spain is the fourth economy in the European Union. So why not? This is why I don't think it's a good idea to signal yourself as the voice if you don't have the capacity to have the strong support of European allies. That's my
And
something
I'll
that
add to that, Barney, if you don't mind, because
yes, please.
there's a policy window about to open. You know, the NATO summit is a policy window for the Trump administration to target someone. And they need to target someone because they've made a huge policy push around defense spending and all of this. And while, you know, Spain has made the commitment to hit the target and all these other things, because of the historical relationship, because of the first couple months, there's still the risk to get to Juan Luis's point that targeting will happen at the NATO summit. And I think Spain, the government of Spain, is probably doing everything in their power to prevent that from happening. And they have things in their pocket that they can use. I mean, the trade surplus is a good thing, right? I mean, so we haven't talked too much about that, but that's a huge advantage vis-a-vis a country like Germany. And so I think that from a Spanish perspective, there are reasons why the Trump administration should not target Spain. And they, I'm sure, are advocating as much as possible to make sure that those perspectives are heard.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Juan Luis. Ambassador Ray, can I hand it over to you?
Thank you. Very, very interesting. We could go on like with these for a lot longer than we have on our schedule, but we do have some questions from the audience. The first one is, how do you see the EU and NATO as influencing Spain's relations with the US over Madrid's North Africa policy? That's a lot of words, but I hope you got it. Who wants to take a shot at that?
Well, maybe I
start
can
with the
say,
US side and let Alberto do the Spanish side if that works. I mean, from the US side, NATO is clearly, and EU is clearly focused on the eastern border. Spain is clearly focused on the southern border as the main theater for security concern. So because there is this dynamic happening where you have these two large multinational organizations that are very focused on Russia right now, very focused on that threat, and then the U.S. is very focused on China, obviously, and that issue. You know, you have this issue that Spain is kind of getting put in a box. It's not by itself. There's other countries that really care about the southern border as well, but that's creating a security dilemma for Spain. And so Spain naturally would want to have a country like the U.S. come to support it on its southern border, and that's the natural affinity. But the Trump administration is committed to burden sharing. And so that means they're looking for other people to take that responsibility. That's the Moroccos, the UAEs, the other countries. And so this is creating another security dilemma for Spain. So Spain's got a double security dilemma. They got the one, in Europe with the focus on the eastern border over the southern one. And then you have the second security dilemma that's being created by the fact that the US is interested in finding others to share the burden in North Africa.
If I might jump into that question, Jack, quite briefly, three approaches to that question of how Spain has well addressed some of the issues and problems there. Firstly, is the bilateral agreement between Spain and some northern African countries, defense diplomacy, cooperative security, and so on. The second one is NATO, and this is where part of the conversation, because NATO has deployed some maritime missions in the Mediterranean Sea, which has been well support by Spain, and Spain has deployed vessels and warships in the Mediterranean. And then we have the European Union establishing mainly training missions in different northern African countries. And those missions has been a core part of the portfolio, of the Spanish portfolio, if we can say that way, in northern Africa. So both organizations, NATO and the European Union, have been critical importance for Spain in order, well, to pursue its interest in Northern Africa. Once we are discussing the approach of NATO, actually, for example, we are cheering, Spain is celebrating that now the special representative of NATO for the Middle East is in Spaniard, is Mr. Colomina. So in that sense, NATO could play or can play this role, but in our own interest, and thinking in the European Union as a civil military organization in that way, those have been our organization in order to pursue our agenda there. So that's the importance of both.
Thank you. Another question. Would it not behoove Spain to invest in decarbonizing their energy matrix in lieu of looking outwards, i.e. the Trans-Saharan pipeline? Also, to keep in line with the Paris Climate Accord goals. Who would like to take, Eduard?
Yes, in fact, I mean, the progress in terms of renewables and decarbonization in Spain is huge. So in that respect, and taking into consideration the plans that are on the table, probably the goals will be met well before than expected. So in that sense, for the audience, yes, Spain is decarbonizing, and it's decarbonizing quickly. But as I think also Michael was saying, there are one thing which is also all the interconnections. You can have renewable energies also as the basis for your energy matrix, but this doesn't mean that you will have only renewable energies. And here it's also Spain may perceive itself as part of a certain energy hub, an energy hub with the rest of Europe. But here there is a bottleneck, which is the interconnections with France, but also an energy hub with Africa. In that respect, and that may be surprising also for the American audience, but part of the gas, the liquefied natural gas that Spain is importing, is then sold to Morocco via the pipeline that initially brought Algerian gas from Morocco to Spain via from Algeria to Spain via Morocco. What happened was that because the relations between these two countries are very degraded, Algeria announced that they were not selling no energy, but the pipe was there, so that pipe could be used. And basically, what Spain is doing is reliquefying U.S. gas, and then by pipe it is sold and distributed to Morocco. Like this, there are many other issues on where there could be, as Michael said, I mean, with a more creative understanding of pipes, of geopolitics, of energy interdependencies, there is much more that could be done. But for the audience that may think that Spain is not decarbonizing, yes, it is, and it is doing it very quickly.
Now, let me add something here, Ambassador.
Sure.
Do you know who is investing in transition and energy and green? China. China is one of the top investors in Morocco infrastructures. I think that's very relevant for the conversation. So if the US and Spain are not developing this infrastructure, China is going to do that. That's my point.
Thank you. Next question. Is multi-country Moorish tourism an area of cooperation, or is it each country on its own, for itself?
Well, if again, one of the things, if we thought about this area as a space, meaning around the Strait of Gibraltar, also something that the American audience may need to know is that the border between Morocco and Algeria is closed since 1994. You cannot physically cross. You could do it irregularly, but legally you cannot. So imagine this as a space for multi-country tourism, where people would be going from Algeria to Morocco, then to Spain. This is not on the agenda, and it's not the main concern. Having said that, and once COVID has been solved and all the restrictions, it is important also to know that mobility, also not migration, mobility between Morocco and Spain is very intense. It's very deep. Every year there are millions of Moroccans working from Europe that go back to Morocco. Also, many Moroccans that come to Spain, and Spaniards going also to Morocco for family connections or for tourism. So yes, there is mobility in part of this, but it's mainly north-south and south-north, but there is no mobility and very little tourism opportunities in that respect between Morocco and Algeria.
Ambassador, if I could overstep the bounds of my role as a moderator and add one comment. Thank you. After the US hosts the Soccer World Cup in 2026, the 2030 World Cup is going to be in 3 countries, Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. The first time the World Cup happens in 3 countries. So that's going to be some multi-country tourism and also a huge logistical challenge, I think, for all involved.
It could be a huge political challenge depending on the situation.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
think one thing that surprises people too with tourism, just to interject a point on this intersection between the 3, it's not just that the border's closed between Morocco and Algeria. It's also that, you know, the infrastructure in southern Spain has aged, obviously, and there's rejuvenation happening, but there's also issues. I mean, La Linea is a good example with narco trafficking and all of these concerns along the southern coast. Gibraltar is an issue we haven't talked about, but obviously the politics there is fascinating as well. So when you talk about integrating the tourism networks for this region, clearly that would be a very lucrative package. I imagine many retirees from the States and from Northern Europe would love to take cruises that would go through all of these places and see all of these places. But I think it gets back to the zero-sum politics. You know, when you talk about the future for tourism in Morocco, Morocco is trying to find a way to be able to develop Western Sahara, to develop the coastline as an alternative to Spain and other destinations in the region. And so you'd have to get it off that path. You'd have to find a way to bring the governments together. And again, the politics comes into play. And so at the end of the day, we can't have this great tourism package that everyone would like to see happen and probably enjoy, but because of the politics.
All right, thank you. Another question from our audience, expanding the scope of vision. Does Spain have a foreseeable Mediterranean policy? Does the European Union? Does the US? Good
Yes,
question.
Spain does. Something else is whether it is effective or not. In fact, Spain had something before its Mediterranean policy. It was called the Arab policy. Spain had an Arab policy during Francoism. It had good relations with all the countries of the Arab region, regardless of the ideological color. I mean, Francoist Spain could hug Gamal Abdel Nasser or Saddam Hussein. That was perfectly fine. And we were also the first country whose Prime Minister, Adolfo Suarez, greeted and hugged Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO. So yes, it's a very old policy in that sense of engagement with the Arab world, which then with democracy, it was reframed as the Mediterranean policy of Spain. And then obviously Israel was one of the partners. Spain recognized the State of Israel in 1986. And in 1995, it launched first ever multilateral framework of dialogue and cooperation called the Barcelona Process, in which both Israel and Palestine were full members. It was also Spain-Europe attempt also to contribute to a more US-led Middle East peace process, which were the Oslo Agreement. So yes, Spain has had this idea of transforming the Mediterranean as a space for political dialogue, for economic cooperation, for people-to-people relation. There was a moment in which this looked possible, this little opportunity of hope in the mid-1990s. Since then, unfortunately, the conditions have gone worse. And while Spain and the EU still keep the idea that they have a Mediterranean policy, and in October, the European Commission will announce a new pact for the Mediterranean, the results have been rather disappointing.
Michael, you want to address the U.S.? Does the U.S. have a Mediterranean vision or policy?
Well, I mean, the U.S. is a global policy right now. It's counter China, counter Iran, find energy security, critical mineral security, and address counterterrorism. Those are global priorities, and you're seeing that get expressed in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when we're talking about Africa. You know, that's what's on the agenda. So I think that when Rubio came in and when Trump came in, or Rubio came in with him, one of the first things they did was to say, look, reset. We have an America First foreign policy. I want everything realigned to the America First foreign policy. And so now we're in this transition period where people are trying to figure out what that means everywhere in the world. And I think we get some clarity in Africa from what Ted Cruz has said when he assumed the role as to what the priorities are going to be in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think that extends into Northern Africa. It doesn't extend to a Mediterranean policy because the U.S., and I think this is the whole problem geopolitically for the U.S., our State Department breaks up the region into the Bureau of Europe and the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs and the Bureau of Sub-Saharan Africa and all of this. And so you have three different geopolitical regions that have to contend for having a Mediterranean policy. So it's a hodgepodge of three different policies. And so we don't have a standalone policy for the Mediterranean.
All right, thank you.
If I may, Ambassador, just a last point to complicate the equation. A couple of weeks ago, we had Miss Meloni visiting DC, and this is another point, Italy. Yeah, for sure, we have some cooperation or a deep cooperation with Italy in many aspects, for example, defense and operation and so on. But then, on the other hand, Italy is seen as a competitor, and I guess for Italy it's the same in the case of Spain. Tourism, energy. So in terms of influence, looking at influence in the Western Mediterranean at least, that could be challenging. Who is the partner there? Who has a position in order to leverage, to balance the different interests and this America First policy in the region?
Okay, thank you. One final question. What do you think about the impact of Algeria's foreign policy on its relations in the region, given that the country has troubled relations with almost all of its neighbors?
Algeria, it's a very interesting case. Now it's the largest country in Africa, and indeed it means lots of neighbors. In the southern neighborhood of Algeria, it is neighboring countries from the Sahel region. And there, unlike what many may thought, because people tend to assume that Algeria is more naturally aligned with Russia and China, Algeria is concerned about the destabilizing role that Russia is playing in the Sahel. And this is one of the elements that has brought Algerian and US officials to have to upgrade the dialogue on security matters starting in December this year. So this is a new element. Algeria also, which used to import a lot of weaponry from Russia, is no longer importing weaponry because this weaponry is used elsewhere, basically in Ukraine. Therefore, it has to also to look for alternative providers. China is the most obvious, but I think that Algeria is also ready to think also about expanding the also security and defense cooperation with Western countries, knowing that France is not particularly well placed because the relation between Algeria and France is very tense right now. I think there is a rare opportunity for an upgrade in Algeria-US relations. This probably Morocco may try to avoid this from happening, and it certainly has the capacities to try to do it. But I think that there are some actors also in the US decision-making system that are aware also of these opportunities. And yes, as I said, Algeria has difficulties, has difficult relations, mainly with Morocco, and is concerned about the southern neighbors in the Sahel. But also, I mean, it's a country that has good relations with Tunisia, that it's a relevant actor in Libya if Libya is to be ever stabilized. So I would not be, I mean, I think that Algeria can play a more significant and eventually constructive role if the right coordinates are present.
And
Okay,
I'll
thank you.
echo what Edward just said, because I completely agree with him that there's this opportunity right now. And I think it's a generational opportunity. I think that the Biden administration wanted to play the Algeria card very, very much, and they were unable to figure out a way to play it. And that was a huge problem, because there's a public diplomacy gap between what the US Embassy was saying and what was actually materially occurring in that relationship during the administration. I think that the Trump administration, because of their interest in energy security, because of their interest in burden sharing, because of their interest in stabilization, has an interest in finding a way to build a relationship with Algeria. But it's got to be on U.S. terms. And so I think that's going to be the big challenge moving forward, because Algeria is not just concerned about Morocco. Algeria is also concerned about Turkey. They're concerned about other actors that are coming in and playing a role, that are selling weapons, that are providing private military contractors. They're concerned about what's happening in Mali. They're concerned with a lot of things. And they're concerned with their own regime stability in the long term. And that's always a concern. And so I think that there are strong motivations for Algeria to come to the table. There's strong motivations for the Trump administration to come to the table. And so I think there is an opportunity right now for a major upgrade in U.S.-Algeria relations. And the piggyback on that for Spain is that the consequence of that will be a deterioration in U.S.-Morocco relations, one would imagine. And so Spain could piggyback off of that and find a way to find a nexus point, to an interface point, to try to find a way to improve its relations with the U.S.
Okay, thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you, Mr. Jobson, for a great job moderating. To our audience, thank you for being with us. And I'd like to point out before we close that this has been a historic panel discussion for two reasons. One, it's the first time we've actually talked about U.S.-European relations in an African perspective, but it's also the first time in the 3 years that I've been doing this that we got to every question from our audience. This is unbelievable. And I want to thank the panel for being able to facilitate this. Great answers, great to some good questions. The discussions that we had before the audience Q&A were also, you raise a lot of issues that we might have to come back and look at again at some future point when we see how things work out. Thank you all for being with us, and we look forward to seeing all of you at some future program. And have a nice day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.